Okay, so this is new for me. Normally I would write a blog post to answer some questions like this, but this time I thought maybe it would be better and also kind of more real if I just describe it verbally in a video. And by it I mean responding to the comment, "You don't seem autistic." It's going to be quite centered around the female experience of autism and my personal female experience of autism. So yeah, be prepared for that. When I was 31, it's the first time in my life I had a permanent job that paid me just about enough to seek private therapy for, at the time, severe depression and anxiety. I was also really struggling to get over a breakup. And this therapist had been recommended to me, and I was there for depression. I wanted to be able to cope with life better. I just wasn't coping with things, and things weren't in perspective, and I just, etc. It was difficult. So I went to this therapist, and about 4 sessions in, she said, "Have you considered that you might be autistic?" And my immediate reaction, despite my background in psychology, was no. I consider myself very empathetic, because I was working off of stereotypes of autism, because what I had learned in psychology wasn't so much the clinical, how do you diagnose someone with autism, but we touched upon it. We talked about like the test that you give 4 to 6 year olds to see if they're developing theory of mind. That's really the extent of the clinical side of stuff, and then the rest of it was the theory. So like the main theory when I was studying it as an undergrad was that it's the extreme male brain hypothesis by Simon Baron Cohen, which basically said the autistic brain is essentially the extreme male brain, which means it's very good at systematizing and terrible with empathy. The idea being that the female brain is more empathetic. And I was never a fan of the extreme male brain hypothesis, but it is something I studied, and it was something that was biasing me against my own diagnosis as autistic. And normally I would brush it off like I have done in the past, because it's not the first time it has been suggested to me. But this was different with this therapist, in the sense that this is the first time in my entire life, in 3 decades, that I had felt seen and understood, and not just that, but still liked after being seen and understood, which was a new experience for me, and that I was a decent, good, worthwhile person. And she'd already been so right about everything else that I gave the possibility that I was autistic a chance. So I looked it up. When I looked it up, I realised, oh shit, like this really does make a whole lot of sense. So I did the adult autism spectrum quotient, I don't know how to pronounce it, the AQ. I took that. I had a score indicating moderate to severe autism. Keep in mind that questionnaire is still quite male biased. And then I also got a second opinion from another clinical psychologist who is trained to administer the ADOS 2 module 4, which is for adults, and in my ADOS 2 module 4 report, it calls it autism spectrum condition, but it tends to be used interchangeably with disorder. And then also that was validated by class in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, the 4th edition. You could be high-functioning autistic, low-functioning autistic, and Asperger's. And if you were high-functioning autistic, it didn't mean that you had mild autistic traits necessarily. It essentially just meant you could look after yourself. It essentially meant an IQ above 80, I believe, was high-functioning. And then there was Asperger's, which was considered related to but separate to autism because it wasn't characterized by late language development, for example. And usually people had average to high intelligence if they were Asperger's. But now everything's autism spectrum disorder. And the reason why I value that label is because it means that I'm no longer just weird, which is how I felt as a child, just like an alien child. You can see in photos with me and my sister, I'm trying to look cute, I'm trying to look more feminine. I wished I had a more obviously female name, because I didn't feel male or female or even human. I felt like an alien. And there's me trying to be cute in photos, and failing, by the way, because these teeth, these weren't just big like they are now. They were also sticking way out of my face because I had too many, like too big. I had to have teeth removed in order to make space to push them back in my face. And then these massive glasses and this terrible haircut. I was never going to look cute. It wasn't going to happen. And my sister was naturally a lot cuter. She was blonde. She was a year younger. She didn't, So you've got her being the tomboy and still looking cuter than me, trying to look cute and failing. And it was all part of, I really, 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 really wanted to fit in. And this kind of fits into the narrative about how autism manifests in autistic people who identify as female. It helps you tap into some resources. It helps you understand what you might need to change in order to interact better with people, to connect better with other people, and to, to accept and then also understand and therefore appropriately act on my behaviours, my thoughts and my feelings, versus what is other people's problem and whether or not you really need that, someone else's approval. If you're doing a good job, if you're functioning, if you're getting through life, fine. It helps me value my boundaries and my comfort and my safety. It helps me evaluate situations with other people more accurately, to interact with them better, to create better relationships with people. Evaluate when that needs to happen. I need to put an extra effort for that, versus when I have to practice some self-compassion and self-care. I believe it helps people understand me a bit better, because something that's also a common theme in my life is I'm a naturally very trusting person and hoping for the best, trying to make sure I'm getting on with someone or trying to get on with someone. And then what hurts is that I don't have to be bad or mean or I just have to be weird, and that's enough to make people not like me. And and that's upsetting, because I feel like I give people the benefit of the doubt for probably much longer than I should do. And then in return, I'm being judged very negatively because I don't fit into their idea of how a human being should behave in that group of human beings. Before this diagnosis, I couldn't even look at pictures of myself as a child during school years, because it's just filled with so many memories of embarrassment and shame and people hating me. Like, normally, if the kids don't like you, the adults at least like you. No, I pissed off everybody. But what was hard about that is I was really trying not to. I was trying to fit in, and people just didn't believe I was that stupid. I must be taking the piss, because I was taking everything literally. And that definitely got me into trouble. An earlier diagnosis would have reduced some of the ridicule, the rejection, the punishment, the harm that was done as I got older, especially with men. I was quite naive, and until quite a late age, everything that I've learned is out of experience, negative experiences, unfortunately, and misunderstanding. And my default still is to trust people, or to, I'm looking for specific cues based on previous experience and saying, okay, no, this definitely didn't end well last time. But most of the time I'm very trusting, and that can lead to people calling me naive, and it makes it easy to lie to, but also makes it easy to surprise me with nice things. I can be easy to manipulate too, because I want to please my partners. I really want to, please whomever I'm with. And but it also makes me more accepting, it makes me more open, it makes me more honest. The way I was diagnosed is actually very typical for females with autism, if they get diagnosed at all. So normally, boys will get diagnosed between 4 and 6 years old, based on some really overt autistic traits. Like, they don't want to talk to you, they're very interested in a specific thing, they're engaging in obvious stereotypic behaviours, or by that I mean repetitive behaviours, and that's really obvious. Whereas women, if they are going to be diagnosed at all, it's only through their mental health difficulties that autism sits behind, that a woman will be diagnosed with autism. When I say only, I mean usually. So it's not so much to do with the autistic traits, it's more to do with how you cope with those autistic traits. And that's, I think, the key message here, is that when people say, you don't seem autistic, maybe that's true. Maybe I don't seem autistic. But the problem is that you're focusing on your experience and your perception of me, and not my internal experience of the world. Any symptoms, any traits that you would recognize as autistic, whether that's correct or not, they're only symptoms which may or may not manifest. And what seems normal to you can take a lot of effort from an autistic person in order to come across that way. How that person comes across to you, I guess, would be related to the whole high functioning, low functioning part, like how well can you function in society. Whereas the actual autism part, the spectrum part, is an internal experience that may or may not have symptoms. And in females, there's kind of like, a gender identity mask. Why it might be missed in girls. Girls try and fit in, so there's a lot of masking and a lot of skills that are learned in order to fit in, so you're never quite weird enough, or you're not acting out enough to warrant something being done about it. There's also more acceptance of female quirkiness. You're allowed to be quirky. I mean, I'm allowed, for example, if I'm going to a formal event, there's a whole range of colours and dresses and stuff that I can wear, whereas like a male formal dress is basically the same for everybody, maybe a different colour tie. You know, a man is considered lowering his standards if he dresses more feminine, but a girl is, she can aspire to be more masculine if she wants, or she can aspire to be in, wearing a red dress versus a white dress, whatever. There's more options for travelling in different directions socially for women. So you can be quirky. I think that's something that people get confused with, is that I can come across as very childlike sometimes. I laugh when nobody else is laughing because I find something funny. And I laugh loud, unfortunately. And it takes a while for people to get used to that and think, literally, like, what is this woman on? And should she be on it? I wonder if, like, these manic pixie dream girls are actually based on the autistic women in male narrators' lives, and as like, what's wrong with them? Nothing. But some men like that at first, until they realize that you have your own backstory, your own childhood trauma, your own difficulties, your own desires, things that you want to do, and then all of a sudden those quirks aren't cute anymore. That was another pointless, unplanned round. But yeah, that's actually one of the symptoms of in many autistic women, which is that they overtalk. And I definitely overtalk, and I overshare. And it doesn't occur to me that a question is inappropriate. Or sometimes it does occur to me, but I just can't seem to stop, especially if I'm nervous, especially in social situations where you don't want to be asking too many questions or talking too much. And people are like, well, you can't be autistic because you're so sociable. I don't seek out sociable situations. And it's a bit ridiculous, because it's like saying that someone can't be non-autistic because they are introverted. You get introverts and extroverts. It's just that maybe you avoid social situations because they've never worked out for you. Apart from talking too much, and especially when I was younger, people thinking I was taking the piss when actually I was just taking them literally. Generally speaking, my school reports are kind of nondescript. Janice is, talks too much. Janice can be a bit dreamy. Janice needs to learn to pay attention. But they weren't like, Janice is bad. When you're a kid, you don't tend to act out until you get home. I was known for being a little brat at home, but in school, I do actually have my first ever school report here. It says, Janice is an articulate little girl whose attention at the moment is generally focused on herself. She can work well for short periods, but for much of the time is unaware of what's going on around her. She needs to be encouraged to listen and concentrate so that she will be able to benefit more fully from classroom activities. And it's kind of embarrassing still to read that about myself, even though I'm 5 or 6. And my parents' comment was, good accurate account of Janice, not, what can we do about that? It's, yeah, she is. She's self-absorbed. She can be extremely self-absorbed and interested, although once interested will absorb herself in a task for hours, especially fine motor and computing. She lives in her own world and has to be constantly made aware of others around her and the effect she has on them. She needs to learn to be self-motivated. This is something she finds difficult. She is a kind... Oh, so there are some compliments about to come up. She is a kind, loving, generous little girl who needs to be more aware of her environment. And to me, this is like a prototypical red flag. You know, maybe I'm struggling in school for a reason. I think one of the issues I had going into adulthood was I was very angry by the time I was a teenager, but I wasn't angry at school. I mean, I was verbally aggressive because I assumed people were making fun of me a lot of the time. So even if someone came up to me, which happened with my best friend at the time in my early teens, I was also English in a Scottish school for the first time, and that's just not a good, my personality, and also the way I looked, you know, it was like God wanted me to be bullied. And she came up and she tried to make friends with me, but I assumed she was making fun of me, and I told her off at 12 years old. I mean, the game in my first primary school was Run Away from Janice, because I was weird. There's two things I'd like to discuss here. One, this idea that if you're autistic, you have to have a special ability in something, and if you don't, then you're just weird. That's it, and nobody likes you. That's an overgeneralization, but that's how it feels. And the other thing, that those abilities are specific to maths and science and, you know, trucks and engineering. That's in line with the male brain hypothesis. But there is also evidence that shows while, like, boys might go down that route, girls, and they become like little professors in like a particular subject, girls will go more down the route of becoming little psychologists because they want to fit in. Their gender identity means they want to fit in with other females. The problem is when they try and do that, you know, it's like children can smell the smallest difference between you and everybody else, and they don't like that. Especially girls don't like that, because girls' social groups are very tight knit. You know, if you think about girls falling out in school, it will be over a specific issue, and all the girls will fall out with a girl, whereas boys are more likely to just report they didn't feel like playing that game this week. You know, it's very centered around the activities, whereas for girls it's centered around the bonds that they've created. And an autistic female tries to dominate the game, or doesn't understand the rules of the game, isn't good. In my case, I wasn't good at imagining, you know, certain things. I wanted to replay real things, I guess. I would allow people to hurt me as kind of like payment for being allowed into the group in order to play with them. Yeah, so females try extra hard to fit in, and I didn't realise I was going through such a stereotypical route for a female autist, because I did study psychology, and I am good at noticing certain things and explaining things, restructuring things, categorising things. I'm kind of like a disorganised, organised person. And it used to drive my long-term ex, the only long-term ex I've ever had, a little bit crazy, in the sense that, you know, everything was a mess except for the bed. The bed had to be made a very specific way, and my clothes were ordered, and they still are, by type and colour in the wardrobe. But, like, I haven't picked up this item off the floor for weeks. And I can get obsessed about organising a specific thing in a specific way, and it was the same with my toys. Even like I don't know if Polly Pockets are still a thing, but when I was a kid, Polly Pockets, you know, these like miniature people with houses, I used to set them up in like a town square with actual opening times for the shops, and if it was literally if it was before 9 a.m, you could not go to the shop, because I had decided that shop wasn't open until 9 a.m. In real life, I would build things and then you couldn't touch them. I didn't so much play with things as I organised things. So I liked doing puzzles, I liked Lego, I just built the same house over and over again, and when I was made to take it down again so my sister could use the bricks, once she was done, go back, make that house again. So I didn't actually talk about like the what do you call it? The repetitive behaviours and the sensory overload. And I think that's the hardest one, because a lot of the time people don't see that one. People would expect to see the stereotypical behaviours of rocking back and forth or repeating things verbally. I repeat things, but it's all in my head. I don't repeat it out loud. And I also catch myself rocking, like just slightly, and I stop myself because I know it's weird. The thing that really gets in the way of my actual life, though, because those things don't get in the way of anything, is the feeling of hot and cold and wet things. If you're peeling potatoes or whatever on my fingertips. And if you're making food, that's easy because it's usually your own food. You can take a break. But if you're typing and then the heat of the keyboard is really getting to you, but my job is typing and I'm doing an interview and I'm taking notes, you can't say to someone, and actually it's not good for the flow of the conversation or the work that you're doing, to just stop, that you need to stop because your fingertips are overstimulated. So that's the only thing that really has gotten in the way. That's definitely something that I would get a lower score on with the because they're not observable things unless I tell you, and then you have to take my word for it. There are so many things actually that I feel like I haven't told anyone even now because it's a new diagnosis, and it's like I've already gone through my whole life like it. So it's something that doesn't necessarily need to be fixed. It's something that needs to be understood. And this is something that I would say about the empathy thing. It could be that neurotypical people may be failing to understand us, but because they're the majority, the problem isn't seen that way. It's seen as we have a problem with empathy, but it is questionable whether neurodiverse people have less empathy than neurotypical people. And I say that because it could just be that we're not understanding each other and we're failing to communicate with each other, or considering that other people have different ways of communicating. It's not so much that we lack empathy. In fact, I would say it's the opposite. I care too much about some things that most people wouldn't be crying over. It's more that we don't or at least I don't necessarily recognise the situation that requires empathy. If you tell me that you're feeling sad because of A, B, and C, I will feel that empathy. I will have an emotional response to that. So like, I care when I know, but I don't always know. And can you get less empathetic autistic people? Yes. Can you get less empathetic neurotypical people? Yes. I kind of wonder if I'm doomed to be alone, because the problem that I'm experiencing is I do like to show a lot of intimacy and love, but only with specific people. People are either demanding too much from me without it being based on a real connection that I understand, like I said, shared humour or shared activities or a shared way of life, or they're dismissive, avoidant, and they don't understand my emotionality, or they don't want to understand my emotionality, and there's this assumption that if you're emotional you're not logical, as if they're part of the same spectrum, when really they're actually two separate things. You can be logical and emotional. I believe I am both, very highly practical, concrete, logical, but also very emotional, but also can be emotionally very cut off from certain people in certain situations. So it's not even that, it's more nuanced than that. And that's what I would say about being autistic in general, not just about being, an autistic female. It's just a different way of seeing the world. It's just a different way of perceiving and understanding and communicating with the world. It's not the same as being a good or a bad person, or, being introverted versus extroverted, or interested in this versus interested in that. It's just a way, in my mind, it's just a way of perceiving the world differently, and we happen to be the minority, and people who identify as female are overlooked in that. I don't need special care, I just need understanding. It's the same with anybody, I think.